We're going to pick up our conversation regarding classroom instruction and classroom management with this notion of a mental set for management. Mental set really refers to the teacher's ability to occupy the room. The teacher sense that he or she really has to be present in and conscious in the surroundings and aware of everything that's going on in the classroom at any given time. And we really talk about this with two aspects, what's called with itness and emotional objectivity. With itness is a concept that's been with us for a long time. Jacob Poonen really described this in the early 1970s. And this is the teacher's disposition to be aware of what's happening in the room at all times and to really be on top of it, to assess students quickly and to access students quickly and accurately when they have to intervene if something looks like it might go wrong at the moment. So it means monitoring the classroom regularly and foreseeing or predicting problems, being proactive as problems arise rather than letting them become full-blown problems in the classroom. Emotional objectivity really refers to the notion that we're the teachers for everyone. That, it's often said whether we can't all like all the students in our class possibly, but no child should ever know that he or she is not your favorite. Emotional activity means we're really relatively emotionally neutral in how we express our concerns for our students. It doesn't mean we don't get happy when they're happy and sad when they're sad, and that we don't experience and express joy with them. But it means that we are fairly neutral during classroom events and don't take some things personally, particularly when students are having difficulties. In terms of instruction and management, really organization is the critical factor. How organized are we? Classroom organization is the key. Let's say we're going to teach a math class. Maybe we're early into multiplication, into second grade, maybe third grade. We're going to start by making sure we have all our materials ready in advance and they're out for the students to use. Whatever we're going to use is up on the smartboard or on the whiteboard. If we're going to show a video, that's ready and waiting. We want to start our activities in a timely way. If we've made the transition, which we hope to make transitions quickly and smoothly, then we're ready to get started with a warm-up activity or what we call an anticipatory activity. We get that going and then we really facilitate smooth transitions to each element. So we're going to introduce the concept of multiplication. We're going to talk about having students rearrange things into groups of, say, 3. We're going to use some well-established classroom routines in terms of getting students to participate and engage and to begin to participate in the actual instruction. No matter, as much as we'd like to think we can avoid misbehavior, the fact of the matter is at some point somebody's going to have either a meltdown or a behavior problem. In classroom management, the data tells us that classroom management is a much more effective system than punishment for creating a learning environment that's successful and conducive to learning. So that's why management and planning ahead and looking at all the, trying to anticipate all the ways in which things might go astray is much more effective than using punishment. Are kids going to still misbehave sometimes? Sure. It wouldn't be realistic to think we're never going to have to intervene and maybe quote unquote discipline some student. But it is important to remember that even when students misbehave and we have to intervene, positive reinforcers or the potential for positive praise, things that move students towards the positive, are much more effective typically than punishment. Marzano talks to us about managing classrooms effectively in a couple of ways. One we frequently talk about is student-centered activities. The other piece we want to keep in mind is that we manage classrooms through learning-centered instruction. And there are 5 dimensions to that kind of learning. We want to always help students develop positive attitudes and perceptions about our learning. Okay, guys, we're going to learn something about multiplication today. It's a fast way of adding. Let's look at some ways we can do this. We want to help them acquire that knowledge and make sure they understand that it's useful and they can integrate it in a functional way into things that they do in their everyday lives. And then we want to help them extend or expand that knowledge and refine that knowledge as they try to move up to higher levels of critical thinking. Give them opportunities to use that knowledge meaningfully. Okay, we're not going to count who needs milk today one by one. We're going to count off in groups of 3. And Jake, you're going to tell us, if we have 5 groups of 3 in the class, how many milk cartons do we need today? We want to always be gearing our instruction towards helping students develop productive habits of mind. Is this something that they're going to use? How are they going to use it? What do they have to do to be able to use it? They have to put forth effort. They have to have persistence. Those things we consider habits of mind that support learning. As we move through our day in the classroom, we're really always hoping to try and prevent misbehavior. We're trying to be proactive. To do that, we need to really exhibit that witness. We need to respond to whatever events occur that we think might lead to misbehavior. We want to respond to them quickly and effectively. We want to use a strategy called overlapping, which means we've got to respond to 2 or 3 things, more than one issue at a time in a classroom. Jake over here is having trouble. He's getting frustrated trying to do his multiplication problems. So we're going to say to Jake, I see you've worked hard on your multiplication. Finish that problem you're on right there. And then let's pick something else that you can do for a few minutes to give yourself a break. Meanwhile, Emily is whizzing through her multiplication and she's getting bored. So we're going to say, Emily, you did that so well. Here are a couple of story problems. See if you can use that skill to solve these real world problems. The other thing we want to do is use a concept called desist. Desists are statements that we usually make to help stop a student's inappropriate action. So we might say ahead of time, as we did to Jake, I can see that you could use a break. How about doing this? Jack, looks like it's time for us to do something else, giving him something that will allow him to really move on to another task without having to interrupt the classroom or reveal all his struggles. One of the things we want to do is avoid what's called satiation, spending too long on a learning task, particularly one that's difficult and not terribly rewarding yet because the student is struggling so much with those concepts. The way we move through lessons, particularly small group and large group lessons, is also critical. We want to maintain momentum and smoothness. Momentum is really about effective pacing of a lesson. How do we keep it moving? How do we handle those transitions? We're going to introduce the concept. We're going to have 2 minutes to explore the concept briefly. We're going to do some activity with that concept. We're going to come back and re-explore it and see if our original learning was correct. We want to do that smoothly without these big abrupt changes and without getting too bogged down or without too many digressions. So we keep the pacing efficient and effective. And we've also got to, especially in large group instruction, this is true also in terms of small group instruction, we've got to take actions that are really going to engage the attention of the whole class, even when just 1 or 2 people might be speaking. So we're going to ask them to, do they, does anyone else want to comment? Does anyone else have a different answer? We want to maintain that group accountability. Jack is going to show us up here on the board. You all do it on your whiteboards at your desk or on the floor, on the carpet, wherever you're working. We want to make sure we use high participation formats. We might do a lesson that runs about 10 or 15 minutes, but we want to make sure then we do a turn and talk, a pair and share, maybe a small activity that they can do right where they're sitting to show that they're aware or understanding the concept. Maybe solve a problem, maybe write something down on their whiteboard. We want to make sure that they continue to be engaged in the lesson and know that they're going to have to perform in some way. Excuse me. Okay. To manage a group of students effectively, we really have to capture their attention and hold it for a period of time. That's why that pacing is so important. That's why we want to use multiple modalities. We want things to be visual, like we want them to be auditory. We want to involve some movement. We want to use different instructional media. We want to stop and ask questions that really stimulate their attention. We want to see who's the most enthusiastic, and often we're going to be leading the charge in terms of in terms of enthusiasm. We are also going to want to use questions effectively to maintain attention. Use questions that further their thinking. And what are we going to do to maintain that individual accountability? Again, do we use exit tickets? Do we use write a question and put it on the parking lot, meaning on the whiteboard before you leave class? What are we going to do to really make sure they're accountable for what they've done during the lesson? We use a variety of attention getting strategies. Sometimes we get up and we move around. We ask a question that is thought-provoking or that is makes them much more curious. We know that curiosity is a high motivational factor for students. Maybe we tell them a brief vignette in which they're very empathetic to what's going on. Sometimes we have to rearrange the furniture in the classroom to make it fit the needs of what we're doing, create a seating arrangement that gets students more involved with one another or more involved with a particular task. Again, this idea of pacing is critical. And again, humor is a great way to exhibit enthusiasm and to get kids motivated and to get kids remaining engaged in the lesson. One thing we often talk about doing is improving a classroom climate with reinforcers. We've all had the experience with reinforcers. Reinforcers are any event or a consequence that is meant to strengthen behaviors that we see as positive and strengthen motivation. We have all different kinds of reinforcers. Recognition, which is a social reinforcer, might involve verbal or nonverbal expressions of praise. We have activities that students can earn, privileges they can earn, special classroom jobs, the ability to have special activities, tangible reinforcers such as things of value, certificates, posters, awards, rewards. And then we have token reinforcers. Many schools use tickets where you give students tokens that can be exchanged for a desired object or activity at a later time, whether it's after that activity or at the end of the day or maybe at the end of the week. One cautionary tale about rewards is we want to be cautious about overusing rewards. Sometimes praise can seem very false to students, and they don't necessarily believe it. And sometimes rewards are not terribly meaningful to some students. So we always want to ask them, how do you think you did on that job? And tell me why you think you did a good job or what the particular challenge was for you. because we always want to also be building that executive function and that self-awareness and self-thought. We're going to stop here and move on to some of the other assignments that you have to do in this module.